The insistent buzzing of my phone ripped me from my concentration. Wiping the sweat from my brow, I stepped out of the makeshift clinic, the midday sun casting long shadows across the rural village. The name on the screen sent a shiver of dread through me. Richard. After years of enduring my stepfather's antics, I knew calls from him seldom brought good news. Yet curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of misguided hope, won out. "Hello," I answered, striving for a neutral tone. "Catherine!" His voice was excessively cheerful, setting my teeth on edge. "Just thought you'd want to know I've sold the mountain cabin." I froze, my grip tightening on the phone. "You did what?" "Sold it," he repeated, as though it were the most commonplace occurrence. "Don't look so shocked. It's for the greater good." "Mine, obviously." He punctuated his statement with a smug laugh that made my blood boil. "My name is Catherine, and for as long as I can recall, Richard has been a constant source of frustration. My mom married him when I was 15, and he swiftly charmed his way into our lives with apparent good humor and affability. However, beneath that veneer lurked a man who consistently prioritized his own needs above all else. The cabin wasn't merely a vacation home, it was my sanctuary, a place I had lovingly maintained and cherished for years. Nestled in the mountains, it was my refuge after grueling work trips, a haven for gatherings with friends, and the place where I felt most at peace. Hearing Richard speak of it so casually, as just another pawn in his endless schemes, ignited a furious blaze within me. "You had no right," I seethed, my voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "That cabin wasn't yours to sell." "Relax," he drawled dismissively. "I've been managing things around here while you're off saving the world. And besides, what's the point of holding on to something you're never around to enjoy? It was an easy way to clear my debts. You'll thank me later." "I'll thank you when hell freezes over," I snapped, ending the call before he could utter another word. I paced back and forth, struggling to quell the tempest of emotions raging within me. Richard's audacity was truly astounding, but this time he had unequivocally crossed a line. What he didn't know, and what I intended to keep secret for the time being, was that the cabin wasn't entirely mine to sell. My best friend Laura was a co-owner, and the legal agreement we had established years ago explicitly required both our signatures for any sale to be valid. This was far from over. I sank onto the edge of my cot, staring at the phone in my hand as though it might spontaneously combust. My mind raced, replaying Richard's smug tone. How could he possibly believe this was acceptable? Selling something so deeply personal to me as if it were a mere trinket to be traded for his own selfish gain? The cabin wasn't just a property. It was a lifeline, a repository of cherished memories. It was where I spent summers as a child, chasing fireflies and hiking with my mom before she remarried. After her passing, it became my anchor, the one constant in a world that felt increasingly unstable. Richard, of course, had no such sentimental attachment. To him, it was simply another resource to exploit, just like so many things he had meddled with before. But this wasn't some minor inconvenience or petty transgression. This was my home. I tapped Laura's name in my contacts and waited for her to answer. "Hey, Kathy, what's up?" She chirped cheerfully. "Richard sold the cabin," I blurted out, unable to contain the anger in my voice. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "He what?" "Apparently, he needed the money to pay off some gambling debts," I explained bitterly. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but I know our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible. He doesn't have the authority to sell it without your consent." Laura let out a low whistle. "He really thought he could get away with this? That man has no shame." "None," I agreed vehemently. "I'm going to need your help sorting this out. I'll finish my volunteer assignment and head back home as soon as possible. Can you pull up the legal documents in the meantime? I want to be ready to counter this when I get back." "You got it," Laura assured me, her voice firm. "We'll take care of this together." As I hung up, a surprising sense of calm washed over me. Richard clearly thought he had outsmarted me, that my distance rendered me powerless. He severely underestimated who he was dealing with. I wasn't the timid teenager who allowed him to walk all over me. I was an adult now, equipped with resources, allies, and a solid understanding of the law. If he thought this was over, he was in for a rude awakening. The next few days passed in a blur as I completed my volunteer assignment, striving to maintain my composure. However, no matter how busy I kept myself, the sting of Richard's betrayal lingered like a persistent shadow. I couldn't shake the image of him gloating about settling his debts at my expense. Late one evening, I sat down with my journal, a constant companion on my trips. Writing helped me process my emotions, and I desperately needed clarity. As I scribbled furiously, memories flooded back. My first visit to the cabin with my mom, the hours spent restoring it with Laura, the peaceful nights by the fireplace when the world seemed to stand still. This wasn't just a building, it was a part of me, and Richard had thought he could simply discard it like a poker chip. Not this time. Laura called the following day, her tone brisk and businesslike. "I went through the co-ownership agreement," she stated. "You were right. He had absolutely no authority." The insistent buzzing of my phone pulled me abruptly from my work. Wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead, I stepped outside the makeshift clinic. The midday sun cast long, stark shadows across the rural village. The name flashing on my screen sent a wave of nausea through me. Richard. After years of navigating my stepfather's manipulative behavior, I knew calls from him rarely heralded anything positive. Still, a nagging curiosity, perhaps tinged with a sliver of hope, compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Catherine!" His tone was excessively bright, almost manic, which immediately put me on guard. "Just thought you'd want to know I've sold the mountain cabin." My blood ran cold. I gripped the phone tighter, my voice barely a whisper. "You did what?" "Sold it," he repeated, as though discussing the most mundane transaction. "Don't be so dramatic. It's for the best." "My best, obviously." A smug chuckle followed, a sound that grated on my nerves and fueled the anger simmering within me. "My name is Catherine, and Richard has been a thorn in my side for as long as I can remember. My mom married him when I was 15, and he quickly ingratiated himself into our family with superficial charm and feigned good humor. Beneath that carefully constructed facade, however, was a man who never hesitated to put his own needs first, regardless of the consequences for others. The cabin wasn't just a vacation property, it was my sanctuary, a place where I'd poured countless hours of love and labor over the years. Nestled high in the mountains, it offered respite from the pressures of my work, a welcoming space for friends, and a profound sense of peace I found nowhere else. Hearing Richard discuss its sale so flippantly, as if it were a mere pawn in his self-serving games, was infuriating. "You had absolutely no right," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed fury. "That cabin wasn't yours to sell." "Relax," he drawled condescendingly. "I've been managing things while you're gallivanting around the globe, saving the world. Besides, what's the use of owning something you never even use? It was an easy way to settle my debts. You'll thank me eventually." "I'll thank you when pigs fly," I retorted, abruptly ending the call before his manipulative words could further inflame my anger. I paced restlessly, trying to control the maelstrom of emotions churning inside me. Richard's audacity knew no bounds. This time, however, he had grossly miscalculated. What Richard didn't know, and what I planned to keep to myself for the time being, was that the cabin wasn't solely mine to sell. My best friend Laura was a co-owner, and the legally binding agreement we had drawn up years prior explicitly required both our signatures for any sale to be considered valid. This was far from over. I sat heavily on the edge of my cot, staring at the phone in my hand. My mind raced, replaying Richard's smug tone. How could he possibly think this was acceptable behavior? Selling something so deeply personal to me as if it were a worthless trinket, simply to alleviate his own self-inflicted financial woes. The cabin wasn't just a building, it represented a lifeline to cherished memories, a tangible connection to my past. It was where I spent idyllic summers as a child, exploring the woods and creating lasting memories with my mom before she remarried. After she passed, it became my anchor, a place of solace and stability in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. Richard, naturally, had no such emotional connection to the cabin. For him, it was merely another asset to exploit, just like he had done countless times before. But this was different. This wasn't some minor infraction. This was a violation of my trust and a blatant disregard for my feelings. I called Laura, my fingers hovering over her contact. "Hey, Kathy?" "What's up?" she answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Richard sold the cabin," I blurted out, the words laced with anger and disbelief. A stunned silence followed. "He what?" "Apparently, he needed money to pay off some gambling debts," I said, the bitterness evident in my voice. "He seems to think he can do whatever he pleases, but our co-ownership agreement makes it quite clear that he can't. He has absolutely no authority to sell it without your consent." Laura whistled softly. "Seriously? He actually thought he could get away with that? The man has absolutely no shame." "None whatsoever," I agreed grimly. "I'm going to need your help to sort this out. I'll finish up my work here and head back home as soon as I can. Could you pull up the legal documents in the meantime? I want to be fully prepared to challenge this when I get back." "Absolutely," Laura said, her voice firm and reassuring. "We'll handle this together." "Don't worry." A sense of calm settled over me as I ended the call. Richard, in his arrogance, believed he had outsmarted me, that the distance between us rendered me powerless. He clearly underestimated my resolve and my resourcefulness. I was no longer the naive teenager he could easily manipulate. I was an adult with the support of my friend, a clear understanding of my legal rights, and the determination to fight for what was rightfully mine. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity as I wrapped up my volunteer work, trying to maintain my focus despite the simmering anger I felt towards Richard. The thought of his betrayal, however, lingered like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything I did. I couldn't shake the image of him gloating over his ill-gotten gains, achieved at my expense. Late one night, I sat down with my journal, a faithful companion I always carried with me on my travels. Writing helped me process my emotions, and I desperately needed to untangle the complex web of feelings swirling within me. As I wrote, vivid memories of the cabin flooded my mind. The first time I visited it with my mom, the laughter and camaraderie shared with Laura as we painstakingly restored it together, the quiet solace of evenings spent by the fireplace, lost in thought as the world outside faded away. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a repository of cherished memories, a tangible link to my past, and a symbol of hope for the future. And Richard, in his callous selfishness, had attempted to snatch it all away. Not this time. The next day, Laura called, her tone crisp and efficient. "I've reviewed the co-ownership agreement," she announced. "You were absolutely correct. He had zero authority to sell without my explicit consent. The sale is completely invalid." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a renewed surge of anger. "Do we know who he sold it to?" I asked. "Not yet," Laura replied, "but I've checked the county records and there's no official transfer of ownership registered. It seems he might have attempted to conduct this sale under the table, which is completely illegal." That sounded exactly like Richard, always cutting corners, always trying to circumvent the rules. "What's our next step?" I asked. "We have a couple of options," Laura explained. "We can confront him directly, or we can pursue legal action. Either way, we're in a strong position legally." "He has absolutely no grounds to stand on." I exhaled, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Thanks, Laura," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," she said warmly, "but I'll always have your back." As I ended the call, a plan began to crystallize in my mind. I would complete my work, return home, and confront Richard directly. I wouldn't resort to shouting or hysterics. That's precisely what he expected. Instead, I would utilize the one thing Richard consistently underestimated: my ability to think strategically and act decisively. He thought he had won, but I was determined to prove him wrong. By the time I was finished, he would understand the full extent of his miscalculation. When I finally arrived home, the first thing that struck me was the silence. The cabin always greeted me with a sense of tranquility, a welcoming embrace. Now, that same silence felt heavy, ominous. My houseplants were drooping slightly, Mail overflowed from the mailbox, and the refrigerator echoed with emptiness. I set down my bags, the weight of my impending confrontation with Richard settling heavily on my shoulders. Before I could even begin to unpack, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. I briefly considered ignoring it, but then decided it was time to face him head on. "Well, well," he began, his voice dripping with false cheer. "If it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter. Finally decided to grace us with your presence again, huh?" "What do you want, Richard?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his tone laced with smugness. "Make sure you're not too distraught about the whole cabin situation. I mean, it's gone now, so there's no use crying over spilled milk." My jaw tightened. "Funny you should say that," I replied, forcing my voice to remain calm and steady. "Because as far as I can tell, it's not gone. Laura and I checked the ownership records. The sale didn't go through. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you." A brief silence followed, just long enough to confirm that my words had hit their mark. "That's ridiculous," Richard blustered, his voice tightening. "The buyer paid in cash and the paperwork is being handled. It's a done deal." "No, it's not," I countered firmly. "Laura and I co-own the cabin, remember? Without her consent, the sale is completely invalid. Legally, it's still ours." His laugh was strained, brittle. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Always playing the perfect daughter, always trying to control everything. You don't know how hard I've had it, Catherine. I did what I had to do." "You stole from me," I shot back, my anger finally breaking through. "And you think I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? You made your choices, Richard, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." He abruptly ended the call, leaving me standing there, phone in hand, trembling with a mixture of anger and a strange sense of triumph. For years, I had allowed Richard to manipulate me, guilt-trip me, and take advantage of my patience. But not anymore. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about reclaiming my voice, my boundaries, and my sense of self-worth. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, reviewing the documents Laura had sent. The co-ownership agreement was crystal clear. Neither of us could sell the cabin without the other's express written consent. Richard's actions weren't just unethical, they were illegal. A sharp knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Richard standing there, wearing his usual smug expression. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, but didn't wait for a response before stepping inside. I folded my arms and watched as he settled into a chair, his demeanor radiating an air of false confidence. "What do you want, Richard?" "Look, Catherine," he began, his tone condescending. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand my position. I was desperate. The people I owed money to weren't exactly patient." I raised an eyebrow. "And you thought stealing my property was an acceptable solution?" "Borrowing," he corrected, as though the semantic difference somehow justified his actions. "I was going to make it back. Once my luck turned around, I would have paid you back every penny." I couldn't help but laugh. "Your luck? That's what you're basing this on, Richard? You've been gambling away money for as long as I've known you, and it's never worked out. Why would this time be any different?" He shifted uncomfortably, but his bravado quickly returned. "You're overreacting. It's just a cabin. You're not even here most of the time. Why not let someone else make use of it?" "Because it's mine," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "Because it's my home. You don't get to decide what I value or what I do with my property. And for the record, Laura values it just as much as I do. Your little sale is invalid, and you know it." His face darkened, and for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed something akin to fear in his eyes. "You wouldn't really go to the authorities, would you? You wouldn't ruin your own stepfather like that?" I leaned forward, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "Try me." For the first time, Richard seemed to have no response. The smugness that usually cloaked him had vanished, replaced by a look of genuine unease. The tables had turned, and he knew it. He had finally pushed me too far, and I was ready to fight for what was mine, no matter the cost. He offered no snappy retort, simply muttered something unintelligible under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door behind him with theatrical force. I sank back into my chair, heart pounding, the confrontation leaving me shaken but also strangely exhilarated. A spark of satisfaction flickered within me. Richard was finally beginning to realize that his usual manipulative tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about reclaiming my power and standing up to someone who had taken advantage of me for far too long. After Richard's dramatic exit, I immediately called Laura to fill her in on the details. "He showed up at my house," I said, pacing restlessly around the living room. "Tried to spin some sob story about how he borrowed the cabin to settle his debts." Laura snorted derisively. "Borrowed? Does he even listen to himself?" "What did you say?" "I told him the sale was invalid and that if he pushed the issue, I would involve the authorities," I replied. That seemed to rattle him a bit, but knowing Richard, he's probably already concocting his next scheme. "Let him scheme," Laura said firmly. "We have the law on our side. I've already contacted a lawyer and we've drafted a formal cease and desist letter. If he tries to involve the buyer again, we'll have a solid legal paper trail ready to shut it down." I nodded, her words a source of reassurance and strength. "Thanks, Laura. I honestly don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," she said warmly. "But we're in this together, remember?" Over the next few days, I focused on gathering as much evidence as possible. I meticulously documented the co-ownership agreement, collected screenshots of text messages Richard had sent regarding the sale, and even tracked down the real estate agent involved in the fraudulent transaction. When I contacted the agent, her voice was strained, laced with nervousness. "Look, I didn't know the full story," she said quickly. "Richard assured me he had permission to sell. If I'd known the cabin had a co-owner, I never would have touched the deal." "Well, now you do," I said, keeping my tone level and professional. "I'm not trying to implicate you in this, but I need your cooperation. Can you confirm that Richard signed the paperwork alone?" "Yes," she admitted hesitantly. "The buyer hasn't paid in full yet because I flagged the transaction as potentially problematic. I can provide you with the relevant documents if you need them." "That would be extremely helpful," I said, jotting down her contact information. As I hung up, a renewed sense of determination surged through me. Richard had assumed I would be too passive, too far removed from the situation, to effectively challenge him. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. That evening, Laura called with more positive news. "The cease and desist letter is ready," she announced. "We'll send it first thing tomorrow, and if he tries anything else, we'll escalate the legal action." "Perfect," I replied, a small smile finally breaking through the tension I had been carrying. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control returning. Richard thought he could steamroll me, but he was sorely mistaken. The following morning, Laura and I finalized the cease and desist letter and sent it to Richard. The language was clear, concise, and uncompromising. Any further attempts to claim ownership of the cabin or engage the buyer would result in immediate and decisive legal action. I could almost picture his reaction upon receiving it, a mixture of disbelief, outrage, and perhaps, finally, a flicker of fear. For years, he had manipulated and intimidated people into submission, but this time, he was up against a wall he couldn't charm his way through. Later that day, the real estate agent emailed me the documentation she had promised. Seeing Richard's signature on the fraudulent sale agreement made my stomach churn, but it also solidified my resolve. He hadn't just crossed a line, he had obliterated it. That evening, I received a call from Detective Miller, a local officer Laura had contacted. "Miss Daniels," he began, his tone professional. "I've reviewed the documents you and Miss Langley provided. It's clear that the sale of the cabin was unauthorized. Based on the evidence, we can initiate a formal investigation if you wish to pursue this further." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I absolutely want to pursue this." Detective Miller continued. "We'll begin by contacting the buyer and explaining the situation. If Richard continues to interfere, we'll escalate the charges to include fraudulent misrepresentation, which carries significantly more serious consequences." "Thank you, Detective," I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Please let me know if you require anything further from me." As I hung up, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The wheels of justice were finally in motion. The following day, Richard called, his voice thick with anger, but I could also detect a distinct undercurrent of desperation. Do you have any idea what you've done, Catherine? He demanded. You're ruining everything! No, Richard, I replied calmly. I'm protecting what's rightfully mine. You did this to yourself. You've always been so ungrateful, he snarled. I stepped in when your mother couldn't handle things, and this is how you repay me? I couldn't help but laugh. You didn't step in, Richard. You took over. You manipulated, lied, and used people to get what you wanted. And now you're facing the consequences. He started to argue, but I cut him off. This conversation is over. If you have anything further to say, I suggest you contact my lawyer. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, my heart still racing. Richard's reign of manipulation and intimidation was finally over. I was no longer willing to be his victim. I was taking back my power, one carefully calculated step at a time. The cabin, my sanctuary, would be mine again. And Richard would learn, once and for all, that he couldn't control me anymore. 2 days later, Detective Miller called with an update. Miss Daniels, he began, we've spoken with the buyer, and they've agreed to halt the transaction. They were completely unaware of the co-ownership agreement and are fully cooperating with the investigation. Relief washed over me. That's fantastic news! Does this mean the sale is officially voided? Yes, he confirmed. The cabin remains under your and Miss Langley's ownership. However, we'll need to keep the case open to address your stepfather's fraudulent actions. Do you wish to press charges? I hesitated for only a moment. Yes, I said firmly. I want him held accountable. Understood, Detective Miller replied. We'll proceed accordingly. Thank you for your cooperation. After the call, I exhaled deeply, a sense of calm finally returning after weeks of tension and anxiety. The cabin was safe, and Richard's deceitful scheme was unraveling. Later that afternoon, I called Laura to share the good news. The sale is officially void, I exclaimed. The buyer's backing out, and the cabin is ours again. That's a massive win, Laura responded, her excitement palpable. But what about Richard? The police are pursuing their investigation, I explained. He's not getting away with this. Good, she said emphatically. It's about time someone stood up to him. Her words resonated with me long after we hung up. For years, I had allowed Richard to get away with far too much. His manipulations, his sense of entitlement, his complete disregard for boundaries. But this time, I had fought back, and it felt like a pivotal moment, not just in this particular situation, but in how I approached life in general. That evening, I returned to the cabin for the first time since arriving home. Stepping inside, I was overwhelmed by a wave of emotion. The familiar scent of the wood paneling, the comforting creaks of the floorboards, it all served as a powerful reminder of why this place held such deep significance for me. I sat by the fireplace, allowing the tranquility of the mountains to wash over me. This was my haven, a repository of cherished memories, a place of celebration and solace, and it was still mine, thanks to my own resilience and Richard's spectacular miscalculation. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to fully smile. I wasn't just reclaiming a property, I was reclaiming a part of myself. A week later, Detective Miller called with the final update. Miss Daniels, he began, I wanted to inform you that your stepfather has been formally charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted theft of property. He'll be required to appear in court, and based on the evidence we've gathered, the case against him is very strong. Hearing those words brought a complex mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and even a touch of sadness. Thank you for everything, Detective, I said sincerely. You've handled this situation with exceptional professionalism. You handled this situation with a lot of strength, he replied. It's not easy to stand up to family, but you did the right thing. After the call, I sat quietly for a while, processing the weight of everything that had transpired. Richard had been a looming presence in my life for years, albeit a toxic one. Now, I was finally free from his manipulative grasp. The next day, Laura and I met at the cabin. She brought a bottle of wine to celebrate, and we sat on the porch, overlooking the breathtaking mountain vista, the crisp air carrying the scent of pine and earth. To us, Laura said, raising her glass, and to not letting anyone push us around. I clinked my glass against hers, laughing softly. To us. As we talked, I realized how much I had learned from this ordeal. I had spent so much of my life avoiding conflict, trying to maintain a fragile peace, particularly with Richard. But this time, I had stood my ground, and it felt transformative, not only in my relationship with him, but in how I perceived myself. You know, Laura said, interrupting my thoughts, this cabin has always been more than just a property. It's a symbol of everything we've built, everything we've worked for. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you again. Her words resonated deeply. The cabin wasn't just a house in the mountains. It was a reflection of my independence, my resilience, and my unwavering determination to protect what mattered most. Later that night, as I sat by the fireplace, I felt a profound sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Richard's betrayal had tested me in ways I never could have anticipated, but it had also revealed a strength I didn't know I possessed. The cabin was safe, my boundaries were firmly established, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly in control of my life. In the weeks that followed, life gradually settled into a new, more peaceful rhythm. The cabin, once a battleground for Richard's greed, became my sanctuary once more. Each creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside, served as a gentle reminder of what I had fought so hard to protect. I didn't hear much from Richard after the charges were filed. My mom called once, her voice hesitant. "You know how he gets, Catherine," she said, her usual defense of him ringing hollow this time. "I do," I replied evenly, "and that's precisely why I did what I had to do." She didn't argue. For the first time, there was no attempt to guilt me, no desperate plea for reconciliation, just a quiet sigh before she said, "I hope you find peace." "I already have," I replied, and I meant it with all my heart. Laura and I spent the next few weekends working on small renovations to the cabin. We painted the porch, patched the roof, and planted wildflowers along the perimeter of the property. With every nail hammered and every brushstroke applied, I felt a sense of renewal, of reclaiming not just the physical space, but also my own sense of self. The cabin, once threatened by Richard's greed, was now a symbol of my resilience, a testament to the strength I had found within myself, and a promise of a brighter future. With every nail hammered and every brushstroke applied, I felt a sense of restoration that extended beyond the physical space. It was as though I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, alongside the cabin. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, Laura turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "So, what's next for you, Kathy?" she asked. "You've reclaimed the cabin, stood up to Richard. What's the next big adventure?" I considered her question for a moment, the answer emerging with surprising clarity. "I'm going to keep doing what I love," I said, my voice filled with a newfound sense of conviction. "Volunteering, traveling, living life on my own terms. But this time, I'm not letting anyone dictate how I live, how I spend my time, or what I prioritize." She smiled, raising her glass in a toast. "To that?" As the days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting on the valuable lessons learned from this ordeal. It wasn't just about the cabin or even about Richard. It was about recognizing my own inherent strength and resilience. For years, I had allowed his manipulative behavior to dictate my responses, to determine how much I pushed back, how much I tolerated. Now, I understood that I was capable of setting healthy boundaries and upholding them, regardless of how uncomfortable it might make others feel. The cabin stood as a tangible symbol of that personal growth, a constant reminder that I didn't have to sacrifice my own peace of mind or my values for anyone else's comfort or convenience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, I stood on the porch, breathing in the cool, pine-scented air. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of belonging, of being truly at home, not just within the familiar walls of the cabin, but within myself. The battle for the cabin had been a battle for my own soul, a struggle for autonomy and self-respect. And I had emerged victorious. The experience had been transformative. It had forced me to confront not only Richard's manipulative behavior, but also my own ingrained patterns of passivity and avoidance. Reclaiming the cabin had become synonymous with reclaiming my own voice, my own agency, and my own sense of self-worth. I had learned that true strength lies not in avoiding conflict, but in facing it head-on with courage and conviction. And while the journey had been challenging, even painful at times, the rewards were immeasurable. The peace I felt that evening on the porch was a hard-won peace, a peace born of resilience, determination, and the unwavering support of a true friend. It was a peace that extended beyond the tranquil setting of the mountains, a peace that had taken root deep within my heart, promising a future filled with authenticity, purpose, and the quiet confidence of knowing my own worth. I had faced my demons, both internal and external, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life defined by my own values, my own passions, and my own unwavering sense of self. The cabin, once a source of contention and anxiety, had become a symbol of hope, a testament to my newfound strength, and a sanctuary where I could finally be free to be myself.